Welcome back, everyone. This is the Hyrox Ramp Academy podcast, and I'm thrilled to bring you our next fascinating episode. I'm Ralf Wenz, sports scientist and head of Hyrox 365 brand and performance, as well as the founder of Stixits and the training methodology Flownetics. What drives my work is developing three-dimensional movement solutions that integrate rotational forces, approaches we are now building on the Hyrox Ramp standards to better prepare athletes for the unique demands they face during competitions. Today we are diving into something truly game-changing, the fascial system. For decades, fascia was dismissed as just packing material in the body, something that simply held everything together without much importance. But that understanding has completely transformed. Recent research shows fascia is actually an incredibly complex, dynamic tissue system crucial for movement, stability, and overall biomechanics. Its ability to transmit force, provide structural support, and enhance proprioception makes it absolutely essential for both health and performance. That's why we are seeing growing recognition of fascia's importance across medical, scientific, athletic, and training communities worldwide. To help us understand this critical bodily system, I've brought in a true authority on this subject. Joining us today is Ariya Lodge, a world-renowned fascia expert with over 3 decades of experience in exercise science, health, and sports performance. Ariya's journey began at just 17, inspired by his therapist parents in rural New South Wales and fueled by his own athletic backgrounds in track and field, cycling, boxing, weightlifting, rugby, and swimming. What makes Ariya's perspective truly exceptional is his first-hand experience with injury and recovery. After suffering devastating spinal injuries from extreme sports and horseback riding accidents, Ariya didn't just recover, he completely transformed his approach to the human body. His personal journey through pain became his professional mission: to understand the human movement at its most fundamental level and help others achieve their physical potential without the setbacks he experienced. This path led him to conduct groundbreaking research across medical and sports science disciplines, ultimately developing his expertise as a rehabilitation specialist with a truly holistic methodology. Today, Ariya's client list reads like a who is who of high-performance individuals: elite athletes pushing physical boundaries, first responders whose lives depends on functional movement, and military personnel who needs their body to perform under extreme conditions. His innovating training and rehabilitation approaches have literally kept firefighters in the field and soldiers mission ready. His education is equally impressive, having studied directly under Paul Chek, a pioneer in corrective kinesiology, stress management, and integrated wellness approaches. But what truly sets Ariya apart is his specialized focus on the fascial system. This intricate connective tissue network that links every muscle, organ, and movement pattern in our body has become his primary area of expertise. Ariya works at the cutting edge, building on the latest findings by leading fascia researchers like Professor Robert Schleib and his colleagues, while translating their scientific breakthroughs into practical applications that transform both therapy and training methodologies. Through his innovative home dynamic bone therapy and the revolutionary 4RR method, Ariya is teaching people worldwide, from Olympic athletes to everyday fitness and enthusiasts, how to harness their fascial system for enhanced healing, resilience, and optimal performance. Trust me when I say this conversation will fundamentally change how you view your own body, because once you truly understand fascia through Ariya's eyes, you'll never approach movement training and recovery the same way again. Welcome, Ariya Lodge. Thanks for making the long way from Italy up to Germany. Let us talk about fascia. It's something that a lot of people talk about, but I think there is not really that much knowledge out there. So it's really trying to get down to the basis of what it really is. So thank you for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure. Yeah, I've come a long way. I normally live in Australia, so these days I'm more local in Europe, and I'm enjoying going around and collaborating and meeting all the scientists that I've been following for a long time, and trying to, translate their findings into real-world solutions for strength and conditioning and improving athletic performance and rehabilitation, which is my specialty area. And that's what has been great. And really enjoyed this time since I met you at the conference in Munich.
Yeah, that's what we have to talk about quickly. So we met at a conference, which was the first time that there was a conference mixed with science of fascia and strength and conditioning.
Yeah.
And that's actually what we try to break down today, right? What is the effect of fascia on strength and conditioning training or training itself?
Absolutely.
So I would like to start to tell you my point of view on fascia a little bit. Not my point of view, but my understanding of it.
Yeah.
So, of course, I studied it a little bit because of our training program and our tools, of course, where we think that we get the fascia to be trained. So I see fascia as this amazing three-dimensional spider web that connects everything in our body, from bones to tendons to ligaments to muscle to organs. Because if we wouldn't have something like that, a structure like that, we wouldn't be moving at all, right?
Yeah.
Because the muscle itself just goes probably over two joints, but there's something missing.
Yeah.
Because they know
100%.
they would be always under tension,
Yeah.
the muscle, to keep us upright. So there has to be something that connects everything. So that's why we call it connective tissue.
Yeah.
What I really wonder is that we always thought that it has no effect for a long, long time.
Strange, right?
That's very strange.
Yeah.
So this is my really basic understanding of it, that it's essential for keeping us upright, keeping us in posture, and at the same time gets us moving.
Yeah.
But you're the specialist, so I would like to hand it over to you and tell us a little bit more why it matters that much.
All right. So in my career, apart from helping athletes achieve their best, I've been working a lot with injuries and people that have really suffered terribly and suffered a lot of pain. And so for me, it was really important to look at the body from a point of view of, okay, what can I do to help the person improve their function, help the person restore their function, and help them out of pain? So that led me to try to understand better the structure and what was responsible, what was mostly responsible for all of this. When I looked at the earlier chiropractic ideology, we're looking at bones. And they said, no, well, the bones dictate where everything is. And we always studied with skeletons in the old days. You probably would have studied with that in the early days of sports science training. And yes, that's a very important structure, but a bone is connective tissue as well, by definition. And it's quite rigid, but it's not inert. In fact, it's the same collagen that your skin is made of, the hair is made of, that the fascia is also made of. And it's held together by ligaments and by fascia. And the fascia is what runs right through the body and connects everything together. So it wraps around bones, it has membranous connections to bones, it wraps around muscles, it segments muscles, and it even wraps around each individual muscle fiber. So it's an incredibly intelligent network of fibers. But those fibers themselves are actually tubules when you look at them under an electron microscope. And they have the most amazing dynamic elastic ability. And they're also involved with a fluid substance, the medium that they live within, that nourishes them, hydrates them, and allows them to operate. So it's a quite complex system. It might look like a web or behave like a web in some ways, like a spider's web's kind of sticky. Mm-hmm. And it can also appear as a sheet, and it can also appear more like a web. So I guess it's probably the most similar thing you might have seen.
The common knowledge is that we move through muscle contraction.
Yeah.
And of course, the antagonist does the opposite thing.
Yeah.
But now we get an understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there is even more to the fascia than we think, because it has a contractile ability as well.
Yeah.
How about that?
Well, for me, that was really exciting. The latest research coming through from Robert Schleip and his colleagues here at the
Please
Technical
explain
Institute.
in short terms who Robert Schleip is, because it's such a big name in the fascia research.
Yeah, he is an amazing guy who started out as a remedial therapist at Rolfer, and then he decided that he needed to understand more about the body, how it worked, why it worked, and he's become a professor specializing in fascial research, and he's working there at the Technical Institute of
in Munich, right?
Munich, for TUM, and the university there with his colleagues, and he's very active in networking and working around the world, and very generous with sharing his information and his new findings, and he's pulled together some of the most amazing minds, and especially focused on fascia and what that means in the body and how that relates to both strength and conditioning and to how we're held together, the very fabric of our body, and what it means from also a psychological point of view as well as physical.
We get to that later, right?
Yeah,
but let's get back to the contractile part, because that was something that was really surprising to me, because we always thought it was just this packing material, right? So, but it's so much more than that.
Yeah, so basically, if we're just going to stick to what interests guys in athletics and sports science, is that the fascia has to contract around the muscle fibers in order to give the column of muscle fibers structural integrity and strength. So you can imagine like a packet of spaghetti. You know, you got that bag around the spaghetti, and you think, well, the muscle fibers are like the spaghetti strands. And if you contract that bag around hard, that whole column of spaghetti gets locked in together. And that's what gives strength to that column in, say, a lift, in powerlifting or Olympic lifting. When you're lifting a big, heavy weight, you want to stop that from herniating. The stronger the fascia is,
the muscle fiber, that is.
Yeah, you don't want those muscle fibers blowing out. You don't want them rupturing. You don't want them disintegrating. You want to hold all of those muscle fibers together. And then you go, okay, well, that's just one singular muscle. The body doesn't work that way.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
There's many different segments within a muscle. You know, like the pec's got 3 main segments in it. So each one of those segments is then individually wrapped for doing a different job, for working lower, medially, or higher in the body with a lift. So then we're going to wrap over that again with another bag, and then that's going to separate it from the next muscle and the next bone. And so that's how the fascia works. It segments everything up, and not only that, it then wraps everything and connects it to the tendon, which then connects it to the bone.
So when I do understand that correctly, there is no real muscular strength without the packaging.
That's right. There's nothing without the packaging. And this was really interesting to me, because I've been working with a lot of athletes, and unfortunately some of them got so much pressure in the compartment, say in their shin, in the tibialis anterior area, that the only conclusion from the surgeon they were seeing was to do a fasciotomy, where they actually cut that fascia open to release the pressure, because the circulation was being diminished. They were having a hard time walking, and they were really worried about getting some kind of infection or losing circulation altogether. So they cut it, but unfortunately they didn't return to sport, because that no longer worked. That package no longer worked.
So they had no ability to generate force through that muscle anymore, because the packaging was missing.
The structural integrity's gone.
So
same with a umbilical hernia, or inguinal hernia. Once you get a hernia, you don't want to be going lifting big squats weights in the gym. You don't want to be doing big deadlifts, because you're going to herniate it further, and you actually lose the structural integrity of your abdominal wall because it's been herniated.
But what happens if you train like your muscles,
Yeah.
like the normal gym goer who goes for aesthetics?
Yeah.
He lifts heavy weights. He builds his muscles up. He grows his muscles. What happens with the fascia there?
So what happens with the fascia there is that the fascia becomes conditioned to that kind of training. Okay, so if they're training in isolation and seated in a machine, then the fascia is only going to get harder in that area. It's not going to be very flexible, okay, for one, because there's only a very limited range of motion. It's not going to be very three-dimensionally conditioned. It's going to be quite conditioned in a linear way in one direction or two directions. And it won't necessarily gain a lot of strength or structural integrity compared to somebody who's, say, doing free weights or more athletic sport.
But it still would grow.
Well, the fascia can grow and get thicker along with the muscle as it does, but it is not useful. So here comes back the thing that I've been working with in sports science for so many decades is how is it that a big, strong guy that's been doing lots of weights in the gym isn't very athletic? You know, they lose flexibility, they lose functionality, they lose the ability to even tie their shoes sometimes, you know, like they become muscle bound. And that's something that you really want to avoid. And it's not necessarily a good look either, you know, and especially for you guys in high rocks, it's not going to be very helpful. You know, if they're going to be running and they're going to be doing really dynamic movements and coordinated movements like broad jump burpees or mobile lunges, they're really going to struggle. Yeah.
So it's that the fascial system is not something that is passive. It's something that is active.
Yeah.
And what does it do as an active system? What does it give us as an athlete?
Wow, everything.
Okay, so we stop here. So you heard it first.
Yeah. So it doesn't make any sense anymore to talk about individual muscles or muscle groups even. You know, those muscles are grouped because of the fascia, you know, right from your little toe all the way to your base of your skull and over the skull. You know, everything we do is thanks to the abilities of our fascia. So we need to look at it from a point of view of training that fascia. So again, we get back to the bodybuilder. You will see some athletes, strength athletes will come in, they might not look as muscly, they might not look as well developed, but they're stronger.
And why is that? What does the fascia do there?
Yeah, because it's the casing, the hardening, the connection between muscle groups, the rounding up of all the synergists, getting the whole community of muscles together, wrapping it all up. And when the muscle works against the contractile force of the fascia at the same time, it forms a very strong and powerful unit. And so that power is then translated through a whole limb right through to the spine. And when you're getting that a level of coordination, you're getting a lot more strength, especially in dynamic movements, especially in things like power lifts, Olympic lifts, and definitely in athletic sports.
So it holds the body together first.
Holds it together.
It stabilizes us
Yeah.
during repetitive movements.
Yeah.
So let's say running.
Yeah.
So it's very essential to running.
Yeah.
And I get it that it's very essential for multidirectional movements.
100%.
And that is because it's elastic.
It's because it's elastic and because it's conditioned in certain ways in certain phases depending on the demands of the sport. So when we do a strength conditioning program, what we got to look at is trying to get as much stability involved as possible, as much three-dimensional training and multi-directional training as possible, as much acceleration and decelerative forces active as much as possible. So I'll give you an example. I had a bunch of triathletes, world-class Ironman, working with me in the fire service, and I was running their training program, and they're like, who are you and what could you possibly help me with? You know, like doing a whole Ironman in under 8 hours, you know. So how is it possible that your little program in the gym is going to help me? And I said, well, for a start, you need stability, because if you're doing a marathon, what can happen if you're doing a marathon just on flat ground in your shoes is that you're starting to degrade your stabilizers. You're becoming too specific in one direction. And then you start to get joint problems. You start to get plantar fascia problems. You start to get tears in the fascia of the hamstrings and the quads. You're starting to get all of those issues because the synergists are not working together well enough. The stabilizing aspect of the fascia is not up to scratch, and you're losing flexibility and elasticity because you're getting stiffer from all those Ks. Plus, then they're also 180 kilometers on the bike and nearly 4 Ks in the swim, 3.8 Ks. So it's a long time of reciprocity of one and then the other. And fascia's helping them with that too. But what happens if we're only talking about this rhythmical movement, this recoil and rebounding that's happening within the fascia, and we're not looking at stabilizing that? Those stabilizing abilities can be reduced, and therefore injuries set in and the support is not there.
And you burn a lot of energy to...
Yeah, try to maintain yourself muscularly.
Exactly,
you know?
yeah.
So fascia's happening non-consciously. The tension of the fascia and the signals are not part of the motor neural system. They're part of their own autonomic nervous system. Okay? So it's a separate system that's working simultaneously. And so that's why you're not necessarily conscious of directly training the fascia. That's why it's been such a mystery. You can't say, okay, on, off, like you do with a muscle. No, the fascia is there's contracting, connecting, and responding and recoiling. Okay?
So let's go to the point where we say, well, it's, of course, now we know that it's a holistic system.
Yeah.
So we can't separate the muscle from the fascia.
Yeah.
So we want to have a training that stimulates both.
Yeah.
So how do we pay attention to what and on how to design programs like that now?
Well, what's really important is that we have to have a program that's going to be creating a stabilization reflex. Okay, so a situation where the body is having to use a level of contractile ability to hold itself stable in an unstable environment. Like I was talking about these marathon runners, after 3 months in my program where they had to do stability training, you know, working with wobble boards and balls and so forth and doing some specific exercises, their times dropped dramatically. Yeah. So they went from world class to winning world class. Yeah. And that really blew their minds because it was never considered as part of their training systems. And I've also had similar results with weightlifters. You know, we get people into unstable environments. What it does is it fires up the motor neural system. It fires up the fascial system. Okay. So the fascia's got these very specific cells in it that react and contract. And so those little cells are called the myofibroblasts, and they are responsible for that reaction and contraction. And so they get activated, and they are what allows the fascia to contract and stabilize and support.
So we have to get people in an unstable condition to make them more stable.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let me ask you the question. The same question I got asked when I presented there in Munich was, why would I possibly want to do something that is more difficult than my sport requires? I'm a marathon runner. I'm running on a flat road. Why would I need stabilization?
I grew up a track athlete, right?
Yeah.
And I had really, really good coaches, I think. And they always said the better athlete you are in any regard it will make you a better athlete in what you do.
Yeah.
And at the end, there's this great quote of Roger Federer who says, "The best mover is the best athlete."
Yeah, 100%.
And I think the best mover is, or the best moving part is based on rhythm and balance and coordination.
Oh, you look at Federer, he's done all right in that regard, huh?
Very well, yeah. But who's the best mover in tennis? It's Novak Djokovic, and that's why he's
done
still
very well too,
very,
yeah.
very close to the top two at the age of 40, right?
Yeah.
So what kind of influence does fascia have on balance and on rhythmic and movement orchestration, for instance?
Well, it's everything, because when you're balancing, you're not thinking about it.
Oh, so that's the subconsciousness you're talking about.
Yeah. And, people think it's a genetic issue. They think, well, I was just born with good balance, or not. Flexibility too. Flexibility is something that can largely be trained. Yes, of course, there's some people that are more flexible than others, but, it's something that you can train. So fascia, when you train fascia for balance, when you train fascia for flexibility, mobility, and tennis is a great sport to talk about here, because you need a lot of joint mobility in the shoulders. You need a lot of ability to change directions very fast. You need perfect poise and balance. And you are doing it so fast that you cannot possibly respond to a ball coming at you at 160 kilometers an hour with your muscles.
So when we talk about tennis players and all this multi-direction movement, probably a Hyrox athlete would say, yeah, what has that to do with me? Because I'm running pretty straight. Okay, the track gets more crowded the more people get there, so I probably have to run a little bit around people.
And that's huge.
It's huge, right? So, but what does balance and rhythm do for Hyrox athletes and stability at the end?
Well, it's what allows you to keep going. I think you'll appreciate that some of the latest science coming out for running is showing well over 40% of the elastic recoil is what's responsible for somebody running.
And that comes from the elastic part of the fascia?
It does. Yeah, the muscle winds it up and lets go, and then the fascia is what gives the elastic recoil, along with the tendons. But the tendons are also largely fascia, right? So they're all the one system. So when we're talking about elastic recoil and generating elastic recoil, it's like generating free energy. You're not having a muscle over it. You're actually being given that for free. And so much of Hyrox is plyometric elastic ability. Broad jump burpees, you should be able to just fly across the floor like a frog if you got it right.
But you only see probably 0.5% doing it like that.
But if we start training fascia properly, they'll be able to do it like the elite guys, and they won't suffer. You won't see them stepping through it. They'll be just bouncing through it like a frog across the floor, nice and low and nice and strong. Similarly with your lunges, your sandbag lunges. They won't be having to pause and toe tap too much. They won't be having to worry about when the knee is hitting the ground or anything like that. They'll just be moving through it, just like a walk in the park. And that will be thanks to training the fascia and having the stability. If you're not stable and you're wobbling around while you've got that sandbag on your back, you're really likely to cause an injury. If your core muscles and your fascial sections in your core that are encasing all your abdominals are not working, you're going to be collapsing into the lunges. You're near the floor. You see that happen a lot. People really sort of bending over, knees distorting, ankles distorting. That's how you get injuries, and that's doesn't look good either, And what you said before was really interesting about running around people. When I was competitively running, that was the biggest issue when I was doing some of the bigger competitions and fun runs, is trying to navigate your way through the crowds. I even saw your German junior athletes and the females running recently. They held it. There's one lady, I'm sorry, I can't remember her name. She held it the whole way around. And just towards the end, this Irish girl passed her and gave her a little bit of a nudge. And as they approached the back markers from the previous lap, she got boxed in, she got a nudge, and she just dropped the game because she couldn't maintain that fascial recoil and rebound. She had to then try and recuperate that. and this Irish girl got away from her. So you got to be able to recuperate after you have a wobble, after you have a bump, after you got to step around somebody. And that is only going to happen if you got good fascial training.
So we talk about a lot about longevity, and now we come to a factor that it's not only for athletes, right? It's for everyday people. It's really essential. And Dr. Peter Attia, who is one of the main experts in longevity, and I really respect his point of view, but he states that the most important thing in health span is stability, but he always only refers it back to muscular activity. So if I listen to you, actually this comes second to the fascia, right?
Yeah.
Because building elastic ability in the fascia is probably something, especially connected to the subconsciousness, is probably more important for you not falling or stumbling, which especially in age is one of the main factors for breaking your hip, and then
100%.
it's going downhill from there. So is that true that fascia in that regard is something that is more important than the muscle and the muscle strength?
Yeah, it is, because what we're looking at here is the fascia is something that you can maintain more easily. It consumes far less energy to maintain it, okay? When you're stabilizing in your garden, you know, if you have a garden plot, or you see schemes for old folks all through Europe where they give them a little garden plot, those people do so much better because they're having to stabilize on uneven turf, or they're having to use their garden tools. And it's not because they're building muscles, it's because they're doing this sort of elastic recoil work. They're using multi-directional planes, really three-dimensional awareness as well of their environment on unstable surfaces, which is the opposite to what you think an old person should be doing. And what a lot of old people do, they toddle around the shopping mall or the nursing home on the flat pavement.
Even younger people do that,
well,
right, in our comfortable world right now.
That's what leads to our demise. You know, when you stop riding skateboards and bikes, you start running into trouble. So, yeah, you got to be safe. But at the same time, if you don't stimulate the fascia to hold you together, everything starts to fall apart.
Coming back to running, because I think this is a really crucial point. Especially in High Rocks, because we have these group classes, and this is a great thing because you, of course, interact with other people, you do something social, you motivate yourself in this group settings. But it's, especially in running, you can only do it on a treadmill because otherwise you couldn't do a group training. A treadmill is a very structured way of running, so it's actually you limit the possibilities and abilities of a human to being on this treadmill running in a certain way, and you're not moving three-dimensionally at all. And our ancestors did exactly the opposite, right? And there is lacking the three-dimensional movement, and therefore probably the training of the fascia. Is that right?
Well, 100%. I mean, there's also other neural issues with training on a treadmill. Is that apart from being a very flat, stable, cushioned surface, yes, you get great feedback from, you know, all your data that's running through to you all the time, and you can focus on your posture and so forth. But if you're not stimulated to encounter terrain and dodge obstacles, and you're also not stimulated by your environment, and you're also, in the case of a treadmill, you're chasing a belt, you're not actually running. So when I was working with treadmills and trying to break down all the sports science, human movement behind that, we found that the less time you're on the mat, the better, right? So the ground contact time is different. So the longer stride length you have and the more elevation you have in a treadmill, the better. You're going to be able to cover a lot more distance faster. But when you go to training on the road or training on a path in the woods, you really need to focus on working within your specific style of running. So if you're an older athlete, you want to be keeping your stride length closer and shorter, not having so much impact on the ground and destroying your joints, right? You want to get through the high rocks. There's 8Ks all up, okay? It's not a little distance, okay? If you're a medium age kind of person, then you want to be sort of pushing pretty hard, and you want to be able to work through the crowd, and you want to be able to keep good posture, good technique, and not waste too much energy. Yeah. A younger person, you see them more like a puppy, they'll be bounding along, and they got the tissue tolerances for that. The tendons are softer, the fascia's softer, but then they can also consume more energy. So the running has to be quite specific for the needs of the person at their specific point and age and athletic ability, and then you got to grow on that. But any which way you're going to look at this, what you want to work with is the plantar fascia. The plantar fascia needs to be stabilized in the ankle. If it's not stabilized in the ankle, you're going to get Achilles tendonitis issues and calf issues, pronation or supination, depending on which fascial plane is active up to the pelvis and what the pelvic tilt is. So then we've got to look at what the core muscles are doing with the pelvis, and how the core muscles can stabilize and maintain the pelvis in the most straight and direct way.
So that's something like our running expert in our academy, Fredrik Zillen from Sweden, talks about, that you have to stack your body parts up on each other so you can relate on the elastic recoil system that is given by your tendons and by the fascial system.
Yeah, 100%. And as he would be able to tell you, that stacking is super important, but the locomotion is going to change depending on the distance. Okay.
Distance of the stride length.
Of your run. Total.
Yep.
Yeah. So sprinting is a very different gait to jogging, for example. So you got to look at where you are as an athlete and build on that. And are you going to add interval sprints into your running course? Or are you just going to stick to the jog and save your energy for getting through the exercises of high rocks? You got to have some tactics there and plan out those tactics for your level and have some goals about where you want to take this.
But how does your fascial system help you in understanding how to move and where to be at a certain movement? I learned that it is a sensory system as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So how does that work?
Well, in the fascia, there's these things called mechanoreceptors, and the mechanoreceptors are in charge of understanding the mechanical forces placed on the fascia. And so that gives you an understanding of how to stabilize where you are in time and space, how much stride you're stepping out, as well as you getting also feedback from the stretch receptors in the muscles, and maybe something through from the Golgi tendon organs. There's quite a complicated process. We could spend all day talking about it, but when we want to look at what is the largest sensory organ in the body, okay, we go to the fascia.
Which is the fascia.
Yeah. It's got the most nerve endings, okay. It's got 260 million free nerve endings. So it makes it the 6 times larger than anything else, is when we're talking about what gives you proprioception, what gives you feedback, data in real time, and the fastest data in real time about how you're operating, what's going on, how hot you are, how much pain you're in. All of that is thanks to the fascia.
If you talk about pain, so this is our pain receptor as well?
Absolutely. They're your nociceptors, and they're responsible for sending the pain messages back to the central nervous system and to the brain.
So if we talk about, we mostly talk about muscle soreness, which is a pain. Is that actually muscle soreness, or is that maybe fascial soreness?
Well, I would say that it would have to be mostly fascial soreness, because the muscles are quite inert in respect to the fascia, from a point of view of proprioception. And we used to talk about stretch receptors, sarcomeres, all these sorts of notions. But it wasn't really clear up until this science was handed down to us just a couple of years ago as to how sensitive the fascia is and how much information we're getting back. And so the fascia is covering each muscle, right? So when the muscle gets hot and sore and inflamed and those actin, myosin filaments been working really hard back and forth, rubbing on each other, it's going to create more inflammation and more swelling. And that's picked up by the fascia and sent back as a pain signal. Okay. Similarly, I can give you another analogy. I was working in my workshop at home and I got a splinter, went straight in. Felt a bit of a sting at the time. I kept working and didn't really worry me. A few months later, I had a bit of a pimple there on my arm and I just had a look at it and this huge splinter popped out. I was like, what? How is that possible that I didn't feel that? Because it went through the skin, because there's the nociceptors in the skin as well. There's pain messages coming out of that. It went through the fascia and into the muscle. The muscle didn't tell me that that big hunk of wood was in there. But when it came back out to the skin, I knew
You
about
felt
it.
it.
Oh, yeah.
Because it went through the fascia and through the skin with the nociceptors,
Yeah.
and you felt it again.
Yeah.
So if something goes right into my muscle,
You're probably not going to feel it. Yeah.
that's very interesting.
Yeah.
As we talked about the contraction ability of the fascia, is it possible that the fascia contracts and strangles the muscle? And how does that happen? And what kind of stimulus might it have?
Well, there we go. Another really interesting topic that's going to affect your Hyrox athletes as well, because we talk about hydration of the muscle. So if the bag around the muscle is contracted, then the muscle is not going to be able to take hydration on again, not until that bag is released. So the fascia can become quite rigid over time as it dehydrates, because a big part of the fascia is what they refer to as the aqueous substance. So it's not just a sheet, it's actually a sheet full of microtubules that work like an irrigation system in the body. And those tubules and around those tubules is containing mostly hyaluronic acid. Okay.
Can you explain a little bit what that is?
Yeah, so hyaluronic acid is what feeds the body as far as how it reconstructs collagen, how it lays down cartilage, how it repristinates itself, as well as it's a lubricant. So it's like the oil in the engine of your car. You're not going to go far if you run out of oil in the engine of your car. It's dealing with heat, it's dealing with supply of nutrients, and it's really how we rebuild ourselves. And you can imagine, just like the oil in your engine, it's a viscous substance. And what that means is if it's cold, then it congeals and it strangles and it becomes thicker. When it's warm, after you do your warm-up, then it frees up and it opens up. And that's why I'm so happy to see what you're doing with ramp and the warm-up routine that you've developed with your sticks, is because to get the heat and the mobility and the fluidity
and the activation.
And the neural activation, waking everything up, getting it all up online. It's the same as what you do in motor racing. You would never go out and try and race a car cold. You have to get it warmed up. You have to get it prepped perfectly. And so that's what you have to do every single time. You got to get the warmth back in there, get it moving through its range of motion, opening everything up, and then you're going to be more elastic, more athletic, more agile, more aware, more alert. Don't worry about your pre-workouts. You got to wake the body up.
Well, coming back to the strangling of the muscle by the fascia, can that be a chronicle state you're getting in?
Yeah.
And has that something to do with your subconsciousness and probably with something like stress factors or so?
100%. I mean, I see a lot of people that come to me with, say, sore shoulders, tight neck, chronic headaches, and I can turn around to them and say, well, stop contracting those muscles. Well, they say, I can't, it's tight. And I feel it, oh yeah, that's tight. And it's more that the fascia's contracted around the muscles, the fascia's become more gelatinous, congealed, and sticky. It goes from being a lubricant to a glue, right? And that gluiness then stops the hydration coming in or out of the muscles. So that builds up toxicity as well. The things that don't move, especially fluids, they become toxic and stagnant very fast. Okay, so what we need to do is to either use a manual therapy or a very careful stretching, mobilization and warming action to try to mobilize the fascia again. And that's essential, and especially in your extremities, in the forearms, you probably feel that after you've done your farmer's carry, people's arms blowing out because they don't have the fascial strength that's supplying the grip strength that's wrapping all of the extensors and so on in the arm. So, and the same in the calves, the tendons as the ends of the calves and the feet, they get very sore and very tight and they lose circulation, because it's at the extremity, it's at the end. So it's further from the main factory that pumps the fluid around the body, both the hyaluronic acid and the lymphatic fluid, which is responsible for maintaining good lubrication, cooling, let's not forget cooling, cramping, which is a big issue towards the end of the comp, and maintaining the delivery of both nutrients and hormones to replenish the muscles and to keep the fascia supple and flexible.
And that all runs through the fascial system?
Yeah, because it works in synchrony with the lymphatic system, and the lymphatic canals are running right through the fascia.
Okay. And
helping supply the fascia with fluids and expulsion of waste. So we're not just talking about metabolic waste here, we're talking about biphosphate chains, getting the ATP recycled and back into the muscles. We're talking about the blood capillaries, the fascia's got so many of those finer capillaries in it as well. And that's supplying oxygen, all the nutrients and minerals you need to function. This biomechanical machine that is the human body is really dependent on this fascia that's covering, encasing, and connecting everything.
But if we talk about that, then recovery must be something that is very dependent on the functionality of the fascial system as well.
It's 100%. That's what we got to look at. Yeah. So it's not just a matter of stretching muscles. We've actually got to get warmth back into the fascia. We've actually got to mobilize it rather than just worry about stretching, because if we just focus on stretching, then we're also creating more inflammation in some ways. Yeah.
Wow, that changes quite some cool down programs and protocols, I guess.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, one of the worst things I see when I'm treating back patients is when they've been an active athlete and they've gone, they've competed in their sport or they've done their training, and they go sit in the car and drive home. They cool down in the seated position, and then they struggle to get in and out of the car with a sore back because, the fascia that's wrapping around the psoas muscles is contracted and got them stuck in that seated position. A really common problem.
So let's get to the heart of it. We started already talking about the components of fascia. I think you mentioned the aqueous substances that is one part. You mentioned already collagen, but could you lead us through the buildup of and what fascia really contains and what it is made of?
Yeah. So basically, we've got one of the most interesting parts. It's the extracellular matrix. And so it sounds a bit technological or a bit
sounds
science
like
fiction.
The Matrix movie somehow. It sounds like a science fiction movie somehow.
Yeah, well, and when you actually see it operate, it's really incredible. It's miraculous. So the matrix is also not just responsible for giving structure to the fascia, but it's also has the ability to grow and morph and go in and heal areas. So if you get a cut, it's actually the extracellular matrix that goes over to the cut and pulls blood vessels and blood cells and lymph and everything you need to heal that cut up.
That sounds like a Arnold Schwarzenegger Terminator movie. Isn't there the scene where he cuts himself and everything is like...
Yeah, it just regrows.
Yeah.
And I don't know where they got the inspiration from that, but at a lower and slower level, that's actually what's happening inside of you when you get a cut and you have to heal up, or when you have a fascial tear because you've gone in cold and torn it a little bit when you're starting training without a warm-up. So, yeah, you need some rest time. It was not as quick as our Terminator.
Not in the movie, okay.
Yeah. But it happens.
I hoped it would be.
Yeah, I know. Don't we all? But yeah, it just happens, but at a slower rate. And yeah, so apart from that extracellular matrix, then we've got the liquid component, as I mentioned before. They call it aqueous substance. There's many components within that, but I won't bore you with the details.
Yeah, we talked about it a little bit already, the lubrication, and it's a little bit like the oil in your car.
Yeah. So it's mostly hyaluronic acid, and hyaluronic acid is what rebuilds your cartilage and your collagen fibers in the system, and yeah, it works as a lubricant. Then you got the cellular component, so that's quite interesting as well. That's where all the interesting things happen in my appreciation, understanding of how this amazing structure works, is that, you know, we've got the fibroblasts, and the fibroblasts are really what are responsible for developing that hyaluronic acid and the collagen. So they're like little factories that are responsible for the production of collagen, which is what your body is essentially made out of. And then you got your myofibroblasts, and they are responsible for this amazing contraction of the fascia. Yeah. And that kind of happens in a spiral motion. You can imagine like a constrictor around those muscle segments and transferring force from one muscle segment to the next. So when I work with athletes to develop these kind of forces, it gives them the ability to use the same or similar amount of force in pushing while they're on their 2 feet as they would when they're laying on a bench, doing a bench press.
Explain that a little bit more in detail.
Well, what happens to a lot of athletes, and you would have known this playing or being familiar with American football, I worked a lot with rugby and boxing and so on, combative sports. So you really want to be able to use the gains you get in the gym in your sport. You know, same with high rocks. You want to be able to utilize your training for the competition. Yeah, you don't want to be carrying around useless meat, extra muscle, extra weight if it's not going to be serving you in your competition. And so a lot of times when you train in isolation in a gym, you're actually not able to get what we call functional carryover into your sport. Okay, so with the focus on fascia, what we can do is that I can tie in the pec muscle, for example, just as an analogy, through my core, through my other leg, right down to the ground. So I can actually train somebody to exert a similar force in pushing while they're standing on one leg as they can exert while they're laying on a bench.
So then we're talking about kinetic chains, right? Then we're talking really about the connection from your big toe up to your little pinky, right? So
that's it.
That's what we see when somebody throws a javelin 90 meters, how he really uses the kinetic chain and his body parts to accelerate. I always think of it like a bow, and you really stretch that, and then you release the tension. Is that how the fascial system in that kind of regard of kinetic chain works?
Well, there's two things going on there. They're actually two separate concepts. So the one I was talking about is stabilization.
Stabilization, okay.
Yeah. The one you're talking about is elastic recoil that is first generated through the muscles and the motor system and the fascia simultaneously. So the muscle contracts against the fascia and you wind it up and you let it rip, just like a slingshot or the bow. You're saying you pull back on it and you let it fling. You twist it up and you let it rip. And so that is the elastic properties of the fascia. And so in athletics, you would have recalled when your track and field days doing a lot of plyometric exercises. Well, that's what you're trying to develop. You're actually developing elastic capabilities within the fascia and the tendons and the muscles. However, you can't deliver on that unless they're all working together in synchrony. So the javelin thrower you're talking about, I bet you he was straight as a die. Whereas somebody who's all over the place because they're not rigid enough, they don't have the stability, they don't have the control, they just cannot deliver that power with poise and balance.
Both things come together.
Exactly.
The stability system you were talking about, plus there's no elastic recoil without stability, isn't it?
Exactly. I would see so many athletes fail in rigorous plyometric training systems due to a lack of stabilization and or flexibility.
So when we talk about function, because we're now talking about the function of fascia, right?
Yeah.
We stepped right into it. So one function is force transmission.
Yeah. And that's also directly related to stability. Okay, so whether it's force transmission to do a clean and press, an Olympic lift, or whether it's force transmission to launch a baseball or a javelin, they are very similar. There is so much elastic force that actually goes into the clean and press. You got to lift the weight and you got to sneak under it really fast. In fact, when you're good, you jump under it.
But it's pretty similar to the wall ball, right? Because you catch the ball, you go down, you have to use elastic recoil, probably come up again if you're good at it, right? Because you really go down, you have the flexibility to go down, and then you stretch your system and you shoot back up somehow.
Yeah, I mean, you see some of the really big muscly guys, they just try and do these ones. They don't last very long. It doesn't matter how good you are, you're going to fatigue really fast if you just try and use your arms and your traps to do wall ball throws. If you're using your whole fascial system recoiling after being compressed by your muscular system, you're really doing it with a percentage of the same energy as the guy just standing there trying to throw it up. Plus, it's a lot safer for your spine. All you're doing is letting go of the energy that's been generated by the legs and the glutes and the pelvis. And that can only happen because you've got stability. If you're it's like trying to play pool with a piece of rope. It's not going to happen because the rope doesn't have the stability. You want a nice, straight, hard cue. So that's why you need the core strength. And again, we used to think the core strength was thanks to muscles, especially this tiny, thin layer, which is basically a piece of fascia in itself, is the transverse abdominis. But we now realize that, hey, wait a minute, there's a layer of fascia between each of those muscles, between transverse and between the internal obliques, between the external obliques, between the rectus abdominis. One previous to that holding the guts in all together, and one external to that. And then every segment of every part of that, it just goes on infinitely. But end of the day, that all works together to make you straight and strong. So people say, fascia is just a superfluous thing. Say no, it's something you can train. And very much thanks to the feedback you get from the mechanoreceptors, the stimulation you give them to really activate these myofibroblasts. That's what creates this contractile ability to hold, maintain, and at the same time have the elasticity.
Yeah, elasticity. So we had the force transmission, we had the sensory function already, right? We talked about it's about proprioception, balance, awareness. I think we talked enough about it, or do you want to add something to it?
Well, I guess I like analogies because I'm here trying to explain really difficult scientific concepts to people that just want to get out there and be better at their sport. And I see that as my role in this. And you get a cat, for example, and you throw it up in the air, it'll land on its feet. Okay. why does a cat have that ability? Well, it has that ability thanks to its fascia. It can twist itself around in space against its own muscles because they've been segmented by the fascia.
And it has the sensory organs to know where it is in time and space.
Yeah, 100%. And so...
But isn't that what gymnasts do or martial artists do?
Yeah. And humans have got the same ability. If you didn't have that ability 1,000 years ago, we wouldn't be here right now talking. You know, we're only here because humans had that ability. And unfortunately, the comfort lifestyle, the flat pavements, the convenience has eroded those abilities to an extreme. You know, when I want to work with Hyrox athletes or other top athletes for sports, I want to return them to behave and to act more like an animal, you know, and then they just tear it up.
But still in a human position, because if we walk on all fours, it doesn't help us much if we go upright, because the kinetic chain is differently than when we move like a human moves on two legs with the gait cycle.
Yeah, and I think that was a bad decision of ours to go up on two legs. It's caused a lot of problems because, the frontal fascial plane is really meant for us to be on all fours. And
It still is.
Yeah, I'm still helping people fight that a lot, especially since we like sitting in chairs so much. Those hip flexors and psoas, they just get so tight, and the fascia around that gets so tight, and it's hard to fight that, but when you're on all fours, it doesn't worry you so much, you know. But there is still areas where training on all fours is really useful. For example, the broad jump burpees, getting down and back up again with your sandbag lunges. You know, even things like the ski erg. You know, you can imagine that is an animal movement if you're looking at a cat running along the ground.
If you would put it on the ground, it's exactly that movement, right?
Yeah.
And there's so much elastic recall, actually, if you do it right and technique in the ski erg.
Yeah.
And you see so many people just pulling by their arms, right?
It's free. You know, a lot of that energy is free.
Yeah.
And the same with the rowing. You know, you're getting a lot of that recall. If you really focus on your technique, I'm sure there's lots of good information there online. You can always look me up or you up, and if somebody really is struggling with that, because it is quite important to develop good technique to get the free energy. That's what it's about.
That's right. So we had force transmission, we had sensory functions. We had the fluid transmission already, right? The hydration system for the muscle, which runs through the fascial system. I think we don't have to talk about it anymore. We touched the healing and the recovery, the guide cells, the vessels, the tissue repair.
Yeah.
I think we should get back to that a little bit, because this is something that I think is very essential for people who might have had an injury.
Yeah.
How do you get back to that? And that's exactly your specialty, actually, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's where I come in, and my history of working for government agencies, elite military units, firefighters, and elite police units was also to train them as hard as possible to do very technical jobs, and in a physical setting, and very demanding, under fatigue. And so
what Hyrox is, right?
Yeah,
the same thing.
It's the same thing. It's like the boot camps that I used to run for these organizations, and I was in charge of making sure they could get through the training without getting worse. You know, like the training I used to run for the fire service in Australia was 18 weeks. Yeah, it's not a short course. So it's very rigorous. And so the same with Hyrox. What you want to do is to look at tissue tolerances. You want to build yourself up, but most importantly, you got to get the technique right to start with, get the foundation for the technique, and then build on that. If you go into fatigue too much and then you start to reduce your technique, you then have to try to start consciously muscling over that technique, or you start feeling sore and you start compensating. And So what happens when you go too much into fatigue is that your technique goes and you start degrading your technique and you start losing the advantages of that free energy, the elastic energy. And so, you need to be quite smart about the periodization of your training. Okay.
But if you got injured and the fascial system might be injured as well, right?
Yeah.
The healing process, is it something you only do through training, or do you need maybe external help there?
Well, I guess what I was getting at is always very easy to get on a tangent with these topics, but what I was getting at is normally what happens is somebody develops an injury because they've been doing something wrong. They've been doing something with poor technique, or they've been using a compensatory pattern that's unideal. They've been doing something one-sided. Right, so they're the most common injuries I see that I have to treat. I have to reprogram people. Okay. Secondly, you can have an accident. You can trip over. Right, so I guess that's what you're talking about here. You know, you trip over, you drop a weight on your foot, and then
whatever.
And all of a sudden, you have to work around that. So, my approach is, okay, well, apart from providing circulation to the area, either through gentle movement, working in water, manual therapy, if you can get a great manual therapist that's going to work cross-fibrally and lightly to get the stimulation back there, gentle stretching. We also get back to reawakening it. We get back to agility training. We get back to stability training. And we focus on other things that we can do. Yeah. So if you say hurt your ankle, okay, well, we need to focus then on maybe the ski yoke. We need to focus then on your sled pull, your core strength, things you can do without your ankle, and then train your cardio, say, in the pool. Yeah. Or in another way that you can manage without making it worse. Because if you try and run on that sore ankle and you're limping, you're actually going to create more problems that are going to ricochet up through your spine, because your fascia is actually what's going to help you compensate and manage that. And the better athlete you are, the more ability you have to compensate. The elite athletes that I look after have got over 1,000 times more neural activity and ability than an average person.
Wow. Thousands.
1,000 times on average.
That's incredible.
Yeah, and that was performed by a study professor I used to work with, Dr. Cornish in Australia, as a pain specialist. And the studies coming out of that research were just mind-blowing. So an athlete can lie to you and to themselves. So, you need to be able to find a way to expose the compensatory patterns and to be able to put them in a safe environment that can show you what's going on there.
And lastly, in the functional fascia, we have this, that they work subconsciously. That means it is a little bit like our heart, because we hope it's still beating, like when we wake up again. We wouldn't wake up if it's not when it wasn't beating. It's the same like our lungs, that you take the next breath. It's always there, the next breath. That's what the breathing experts tell you, right? The next breath is always there. Yeah. So it's linked to our autonomic nervous system. So fascia is all that, right? And it's this supporting tissue. It's living. It's intelligent. It keeps us moving. It balances us. It's healing us. It's like, you wonder, why haven't we heard of it for such a long time? But that's science, right? And but now let's get to the point of it. If it all that, how do we really train it?
Yeah. So again, because it's working at a subconscious level, all we can do to train it is to put it under stress, under overload. And that's what I was getting back to the previous conversation about, when somebody asked me, why would I train in an unstable environment? I don't play soccer on an unstable pitch. I'm playing on flat turf. As the same question, why would you train with weights? Especially, why would you train with weights if you're a soccer player? I mean, what's bench press going to do for a soccer player, apart from give them extra weight to carry around a pitch? Okay, if you're laying on your back, pushing up like this as a soccer player, you get a problem. Yeah. So
as most are athletes do, right?
yeah, laying on your back having a push up is not normally a good position to be in.
No.
Yeah, so you want to be able to train the fascia in such a way that it's going to be beneficial to you and specific to your needs. So it needs to be three-dimensional training, it needs to be dynamic training, it needs to be stabilizing, and it needs to be fairly passive, right? Because if you start pushing more, what that means is you're working more consciously, so you're working more with your muscles. Okay? So
it has to become something like a habit, or you don't even think about it?
Yes. And
So,
you
but
would
that
know
is
that.
repetition, of course.
Yeah.
The more you do, the more subconsciously it gets.
Yeah. So, I mean, you were a pitcher in baseball, is that right? Back in the
I
day?
used to be,
Famous, right?
No, not really famous,
yeah,
but
I think you might have been. But anyway, I bet you still struggle to pitch with your left.
that would be a totally different story, of course. Yeah, because
Yeah.
you don't train like that.
Yeah. But the thing is, what you trained with your right to get that recoil, that whip out of that final end range of motion in the baseball pitch is thanks to the fascia training. And that would have taken you quite a while. But you were probably a child at the time and you don't really remember.
No, I actually started pretty late. But the funny thing is that we now, of course, like I developed this training methodology called Flowonetics, which is part of what we put into the RAMP protocol, because we want to train people in this three-dimensional way you mentioned. We want to get them into the state of flowing motion that you don't have to think about anymore, but still it has some kind of instability with it that you have to control through these rotational forces. And this is something where we try to lead them to get the stability at the end.
Yeah, and that would probably sound really strange and confusing to a Hyrox athlete. Cause
at first, I guess so, yeah.
That's nothing to do with their sport as far as they're aware. But, you know, the sport is not just about the direct sort of effect and consequence of a specific action. It's about cross-training as well. It's about supporting the action. It's about building synergists. It's about building a whole community of support and muscles around what you're trying to achieve in the end, making yourself broad-based, robust, and stronger, and more alert, more awake, more dynamic. And so to train like this, what you have to do is to work through acceleration and deceleration forces. You need to work through unstable forces, forces that move, forces that make you change direction and make you move. So when you got a swinging weight like you do in your Flowonetics program with your stick sits tools, those swinging weights put a lot of force through the fascia, through the core. They warm up the joints, which is essential. You know, we got to get the synovial fluid warmed up. We got to get all the cartilage warmed up, because remember, it's a gelatinous, viscous substance. You know, this whole idea of tixostrophy. You know, we got to get it moving and warm and ready, and we have to wake up our nervous system. And if you get in an unstable environment, it wakes up those dormant muscles, it wakes up those reflexes, it wakes up both the muscles and gets the fascia up online. So, and just gets general heat in. You don't want to be going out and doing anything too hard. Rhythmical is nice, but it's good to keep progressing, because the first time you try one of the more technical Flowonetics exercises, you might feel quite uncoordinated. But when you keep working with it, it actually goes into your motor neural program and your fascial program. And when it goes into your fascial program, you own it for life. It becomes a reflex. Okay, so once you have that, it's better than putting money in the bank. You know, it's the best investment you can possibly make is in yourself, in your coordination, in your balance, and in your stability.
So bounding is something that I think gets the fascia going as well, right? If you just do little hops like the running ABC, this is these small, big, but it's kind of unstable as well, right? Because we always go in these directions.
Yeah, I mean, bounding is good to wake up the tendons, to wake up the fascia, to build up the elastic energy. There's been so many studies in sports science on that. But to bound, you got to bound straight. Okay. So same if you throw a spring on the ground, it's not likely to go up straight. It'll often skew off to one side or the other. So it's very important that we have sufficient stability by doing movements that are away from the body.
So we build the stability first to build the ability to bound.
Yeah, that's correct.
So this is actually a longer process.
It's a longer process, but it's more holistic, therefore more complete, therefore more robust. So if you want to run really fast on a flat track, then you want to also be able to run a quite technical trail running course in the mountains, or do some rock hopping, or use something like a wobble disc that's going to stress those stabilizers and wake them up. And that is what we call overload. Overload is one of the oldest principles we've been working with in strength and conditioning. That's why people lift weights. They're lifting well above what they would need for any sport. But if you don't overload the system, it doesn't respond, you don't get a result. So what you're doing with the stability training is you're putting yourself in an unstable environment, which makes you more stable in your own environment and gives you that buffer zone to hold yourself together. So, fascia is involved in each one of these conditioning phases, 100%.
It's quite eye-opening, actually, to talk about it, because it's so... Like, I studied sports science quite a long time ago, of course, and there was nothing you ever heard about fascia, because it's such a new topic, actually, right? And I think we're still learning so much, because the science just gets to the bottom of it and understands how it all works and how it all interconnects. But we touched it slightly before with the injury protocol, because your expertise is actually in healing and in getting people back to sports after injury or compensatory movement patterns and stuff like that. And there's a certain technique you use with it. It's called the 4RR, and you educate people on that. I would love, because we don't have that much time here, but I would love for you to touch a little bit on that, because I think that coaches even can profit from that if they understand it, and maybe get even taught in that regard.
Yeah, well, the 4RR method is part of a system that was developed by our company, which is Homeodynamic Bone Therapy. And so we use a mixture of tactile therapy and manual therapy, which also gives us a lot of feedback about the fascia, which is mostly just under the skin and easy enough for us to work with and affect quite effectively. It's a very special, precise technique over trigger points, so we're getting really good neural activation as well. And with the 4RR, it's really more designed to help coaches understand athletes, because as we said earlier, an athlete can compensate really easily. They can hide things from you, they can hide things from themselves. When you put them in an unstable situation where you can really expose their weaknesses, then you can find the weakest link in their chain. When you find the weakest link in their chain, you can help them fix that. Once you identify that, then we can move on. So the first RR is to really recognize, okay, and to really assess the person, okay. So we have to work on that first, and then after that, what we need to do is to be able to release. Okay, because if we go to a person and they've got, say, a really tight pair of hip flexors on them, and their whole chain, fascial chain there is locked up, we're not going to be able to activate their abs, for example. So if somebody's got tight hip flexors and they're dropping down into a push-up or a broad jump burpee, their spine's collapsing, they got a sore back, they're probably pronating at their feet, the whole chain is gone. It's shot. So what we need to do is to be able to undo the hip flexors. We need to do specific manual therapy. We need to do specific stretching, and only then can we reintroduce the reprogramming.
That's the third R, I guess.
Yeah. So we're getting on to reprogramming. And once we start to reprogram the body, then we can look at really reactivating them towards the final set of double R's, and that is to reassess. Yeah, because we never say we know everything. We take this very scientifically. So we will then reassess the athlete or the person for their problem, make sure that we're on the right track, make sure they're getting the results, and that's how we help them reach their peak, which is the final R. Okay. Yeah. And I just feel very grateful, very privileged to be able to help so many people this world, both with pain and enjoying their body, their athletic performance, and having those rewards. So, yeah, for me, it's so much fun. And, yeah, I'm sure I'll probably have less work now thanks to the ramp program and Stixers, because I won't have so many guys coming to me that have gone in cold
I doubt that.
unwarmed up, and yeah, because shoulders are a big thing. You got to get them warm. You know, whether you're doing the rowing or the swimming or any of the exercises involved in high rocks, you really want to warm up those shoulders. You got to get them swinging around. You got to get everything moving, and so it's great, and I'm sure it will be a huge bonus to the athletes. And it might seem strange to them. It might seem a little bit difficult to understand because it might not seem like there's a direct correlation. But I hope this little podcast chat we've had helps people kind of understand a little bit more about their bodies and about how complex it is and why they need to do other training around their specific goals, around their specific exercises they have to do, or the specific running programs that they have to do, because you can't keep doing the same thing and expect a different result, even a better one.
That's a great final word, actually. I feel very privileged to have talked to you today.
Oh, thank you.
I think it was really eye-opening. It's amazing what this fascial system can do for us if we treat it right and if we train it right, because then we become a holistic athlete. Yeah. And I think then we can reach the peak of what we are capable of.
That's
thank
what
you,
we're
Ariya.
all about. Thank you very much.